Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today we're continuing our coverage of Console Wars by Console Wars.
Console Wars. Console War with an exclamation mark.
Console Wars by Blake J. Harris. And we're talking about 18 through 20, chapters 18 through 20 today, and doing a little book club of it. So chapter 18 is called The Underdog, Days of Summer. And this chapter's pretty cool because it's separated by the 16 weeks over the course of the summer of 1991 before the SNES comes out. And this is Sega really trying to get in there and weaken the blow of the SNES to their sales. Because the Genesis is already out.
Yeah, and it's been out for 2 years already at this point.
Yeah, and they're just this is them also introing Sonic. So I feel like we're going to take the time to go week by week here and explain what's going on and kind of talk about it, which I think is fun. So week 1 is called Radio Killed the Video Game Star. And this is I didn't know that Nintendo just didn't have any radio coverage. That's something that you kind of learn in this chapter, is Nintendo just kind of ignored the radio. So Sega uses terrestrial radio to partner with all these radio stations and have giveaways for Sega Genesis and have kiosks at radio events. Remember when radio places used to do events, Tyler?
Yes, I 90s. Have worked at many radio events. That even in smaller markets, well, maybe they still do it, but in smaller markets into the 2000s, I set up and tore down many a stage when I worked in radio.
See, I love it. So the Genesis has this Graduate to Genesis campaign that's used to target teens, but also reward third-party developers and publishers like EA and Namco, essentially giving away one of those games with a system. It's kind of like a little, I guess it was just a big promotional deal in this case.
Yeah, it's great advertisement for them.
Yeah, and this is before Sonic came out. And I don't know, I'm guessing they get royalties, the third-party devs, when Sega decides to give away a game. They still pay the royalty.
Yeah, I would assume something like that, or there's some sort of deal that gets worked out there. Yeah, I would assume something works out like that. That's a good thing for EA to have their games being given away.
Yeah, and so all of the cool radio stations, and I say cool in quotes here, the ones targeted to younger markets. So we're talking about rock and roll stations, pop music stations, all the cool kids.
Yeah.
They get this deal promoted, and they have events throughout the summer, and then Sega's there. But also, the Chicago radio station, KIIS FM's.
Isn't that a Los Angeles station?
It might be. Is it one of the national ones?
I think it's KIIS. The call sign is Los Angeles call sign.
Oh, okay. Well, that's what's in the book. I guess what we just discovered is a radio flub in the book, because Tyler is professional radio, so watch out. Watch out, Blake J. Harris. We're coming for you with radio facts.
Yeah, radio facts.
But their senior account executive, Cheryl, I guess it's Quiroz, Quiroz, essentially contacted Blockbuster for Sega because she thought this deal was so cool. And now Blockbuster is partnering with Sega because they're kind of at war with Nintendo over game rentals. And Sega's we don't care. Rent our games. It's fine. That's a big thing that happens here with them too, is this radio deal leads to a Blockbuster video deal. And as we all know, it's the 90s. Everyone's renting movies in the 90s and video games. That
was a real popular thing to do in the day. When you're Netflix, you had to walk to a store and bring home your Netflix.
Yeah, now I had to go pick up my Netflix real quick.
Yeah. And then Netflix itself would mail them to you before they streamed them, but yeah.
Oh, I remember watching The Sopranos in high school and having the discs mailed to me. So I'd watch one disc and then have to wait 3 to 5 business days to get the next disc.
Yeah, that's how I watched the first few seasons of Breaking Bad and Dexter and those shows that started in the late 2000s before streaming really took off. But Netflix sort of had it kind of figured out that people want things faster and they don't want to drive somewhere to get it. Because they had 1 day turnaround when you sent a disc back, it got to the Netflix distribution center the next day, so it was actually really quickly turned around. Anyway,
yeah, and they also are supporting the U.S. Postal Service, I guess. So there you go.
So
but not anymore.
Welcome to Codex History of Video Rentals.
The other important note from this week, the first week of summer in 1991, is Kalinski's family finally moves to the Bay Area with him.
Finally, they've been apart for a year at this point.
Yeah, I mean, granted, they're just in California, so it's like 4 or 5 hours away. But still,
That's far enough that like they're not hanging out all the time, and there's no FaceTime. You can talk on the phone, but that's kind of it.
Oh man, remember like the phone calls, the long phone calls? Did you have that in your family?
Yeah,
I would always dread them when like an uncle or an aunt would call and they'd be like, "Michael, I have to talk to your uncle," and I'm like, "Here goes 30 minutes of my time."
Now I can't use the internet.
I know, right? Now I can't use the internet.
That was what it was for me. It was like, oh, mom's on the phone with my aunt, and I can't use the internet.
And this makes everyone sad.
Yep.
Well, and by everyone, I mean Tyler. Okay, so week 2, Mr. Extremely Dangerous is what this is called. And Mr. Extremely Dangerous in this case is Steve Race, who was a marketing person at Reebok. In fact, he was one of the people that helped make that marketing ad, the bungee jumping one that like inspired Tom Kalinske to figure out what Sega's going to do. And so Kalinske wanted Steve Race to be on his team. And what's funny is they make a little joke in the week, that week section where they're like, yeah, Steve doesn't know anything about video games. Like, I have no idea. And he makes that joke because Race actually worked for Atari's International Division and Worlds of Wonder, who originally distributed the NES. So Steve Race actually had more time in the video game industry than Kalinske ever did.
Tons of video game experience, even if he wasn't really a player of video games. This is also, I believe, the same Steve Race that would go on, maybe this is spoilers for later in the book, but we've talked about it before, the Steve Race that goes on stage for PlayStation and says $2.99 at E3 in 94 or 95. CES.
Just really crushes it. Yeah. I think it's the same Steve Race. Yeah. $2.99.
I forgot that he worked for Sega. So that was not only like a mic drop moment for him to say that, but it was also a mic drop moment against Sega because they had just showed off the Saturn, which was $3.99, right?
Oh man, the Saturn.
Wow.
I can't wait. I mean, I'm liking this part of the book, because we're getting the story of like everyone taking off and Sega finally starting to compete. Mm-hmm. But I am very excited for the fall, the downturn.
Yeah, the fall of Sega.
I feel like that's going to be a real gripping story parts to it, and I think it's going to be fun.
And the rebirth these days, like they're pretty successful at their software business, making tons of money, making Persona games left and right.
Oh, they're Persona? Why did I not know that?
They publish them or something. Atlas, they're in partnership. Sega's involved somehow, I think.
Oh, that's good. That's really good. This just makes me even more excited to play Persona when it comes to Xbox Game Pass.
So excited for you to be able to play it. Persona 5 Royal. Oh, boy.
I'll never see it coming. You never see it coming. Is that going to get us in trouble for copyright music?
No, I don't think so. That's fair use.
I mean, it just sounded so much exactly like the song, and I didn't want to,
Yeah. No, I think you can use a snippet of like 30 seconds, fair use.
Nice. Okay, good to know. Good to know you understand what's going on. All right. Week 3, the electronics expert. This is where Sega brings in Richard Burns, who is Sony's VP of sales, to come and sell Sega products more as electronics instead of toys. Because at this time, I think we've noticed this pattern when reading all this stuff from this book and Ultimate History of Video Games. Video games are looked at pretty much as toys at this time.
It's mostly a kid's thing.
Yeah, and they want to turn and change the narrative to what we have now, which is video games is like budding tech. This is new technology coming out.
Yeah.
And so Richard Burns is there to help sell them that way. The problem, and this was something that stood out to me in the book as a total nightmare, there was no documentation on previous Sega inventory sales. So like when they send Sega consoles to a retailer, they didn't keep track of how many got sent back or how many were marked down or what was sold.
Whoops.
So Richard Burns is flying blind at this point.
This changing the narrative too is also important because of the group they're trying to target, which is like the teenagers and like older kids that don't necessarily want to be seen playing with toys, right? So they're like, no, it's not toys. This is consumer electronics. This is adult stuff, man.
Yeah, I'm an adult who's playing this game.
Yeah, you're an adult who's playing a game about a cartoon hedgehog.
That's right, and it's totally valid. I think everyone knows now, especially in 2022, that is completely valid to do. Everyone knows that. All right, so next week, week 4, it's called Tiny Billboards, and I didn't know what this was all about, but magazines are the tiny billboards in question, referring to how they sit on newsstands. And then I just put, remember newsstands?
Remember newsstands. They still exist, I think.
The airport. I feel like it's just the airport.
There's a newsstand on Ventura, or there used to be in Sherman Oaks, and I feel like grocery stores is like a magazine section, right?
Yeah, but I'm thinking of like you're on the street corner newsstand, you know, where it's like a guy anymore with a little shack thing, and it's just littered in paper.
Yeah,
you know?
I guess I didn't have those growing up in where I grew up because we were like a city where like things were just on the corner. That wasn't really a thing.
The hustle and bustle of beautiful Tri-Cities, Washington.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of like corner sales going on there. It was mostly grocery store newsstands, grocery store magazine sections where I got my magazines.
Yeah, me too, honestly, in Auburn. That's where I got them too. But I just think about like in New York, you know, you have the guy outside the big building and he's selling newspapers out of a stall.
And he's going, extra, extra, read all about it.
Exactly. We're talking newsies here, okay? Yep. And that's what Kalinske wanted to do. Put Sega all over magazines, because it's important to note here too, another thing that Nintendo did that Sega kind of took advantage of is Nintendo did not treat other magazines that were not Nintendo Power very well because they had Nintendo Power. So they saved all the good stuff for themselves. It makes sense. And Nilsson took advantage of this by having meetings with people at like GamePro and Video Games and Computer Entertainment and Electronic Gaming Monthly. So when they were ready, they can coordinate a giant release among all these magazines. So I think it was EGM first, is what they say in the book, had like a Sonic cover. And then the next month, Video Games and Computer Entertainment would have a Sonic cover. And then they also bundled a Sonic comic book in other magazines, like not necessarily their magazines. Like you'd open a Superman comic and there'd be a loose Sonic comic book inside.
Dude, the Sonic comics are still that's like a comic line that people read, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, hey, I've never read the Sonic comics. If you've read Sonic comics, which is fun to say, email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah. I would love to read a Sonic comic. I'm kind of surprised that Sega didn't have their own magazine at this point in time. That would seem like maybe it's not an easy win, but it seemed like if from an idea perspective of like, well, Nintendo has their own propaganda outlet, why don't we?
Yeah, I feel like it's a money thing. Money is really pervasive in this whole chapter as far as like what their budget was. So a lot of the things they're doing with a very tight budget, and they're trying to make it work. And we're going to get to a point later in this chapter, too, where Kalinske actually has to justify this to Nakayama to be like, I'm spending lots of money, but I need you to just believe in me. Yeah. And he does, which is good.
I guess it makes sense. You could do it for less money and cover more ground if you have like a good relationship with these other independent video game magazines. If you have a good relationship with them, they'll cover you and hopefully can give you the coverage that you want, like positive coverage. Assuming you're making good products, you shouldn't be worried about that, right? It's all positive coverage, and then you don't have to really pay for it. You give them what they want, they give you what you want. You don't have to do anything extra. Everybody wins.
That's right. Everybody's a winner here when you get to team up with magazines for your cover stories.
You just don't necessarily have control over the messaging when you do it that way.
It seemed to me, though, that Nilsson had such a good relationship with these magazines because he just treated them with respect. Like they mentioned that in the comic, see, we're talking about Sonic comics, it's on the brain. In the book, they talk about how these Nintendo reps that would work with the magazines really just ignored them and like kind of just was like, we'll give you what we want because we have all the power. You know, that's a running pattern with Nintendo too. Is we have all we hold all the cards here. You can't do anything.
Yeah, we can treat you like garbage because you need us, whereas Sega treated them nicely, and so that makes them more likely to be nice to Sega and run nice stories because they want more content from Sega and to stick it to Nintendo. Like I'm sure they don't like meeting with Nintendo when they just get stonewalled every step of the way, you know?
Yeah, 100%. So week 5 is called Superstars Wanted, and I am very excited to talk about this because Sega's like, you know what we need to do? We got to get on TV. But making our own TV show is so expensive. But what if we made, and buying ads is also really expensive, but what if we made our own TV special? Remember the time of TV specials, Tyler?
Oh gosh.
Beautiful time. Still have them, but not like this. This was called the Sega Star Kid Challenge. And Sega made a TV special where celebrity child stars from shows like Full House and Home Improvement and Blossom would compete
modern
for
television shows.
And you got to think about the fact, too, that they're doing straight up 90s, like, Sega Guts. It's like Sega Guts, essentially.
Oh,
Remember
man.
the show Guts?
I
on
gotta
Nickelodeon?
watch this.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think the first thing I watched was like a kayak relay race. This is what's most important, though. If you're like, man, I want to watch the Sega Star Kids Challenge, the entire thing is up on YouTube. The 2 hours on YouTube for free with the commercials. So you get the 90s commercials also, which are very, very nostalgic. The first one is for Joe Montana football. And now, because you listen to this podcast, you and I know that's actually just Madden. That's just reskinned
It's just
to be
Madden
Joe
with
Montana.
Joe Montana on it.
Exactly. Also, Scott Baio hosts. It's very important that you know that, I feel like. But it's just full of 90s nostalgia. And it's great. And I think it's like a really cool thing that Sega could do because they have a giant like Sonic mascot in the background the whole time. And they also are constantly like plugging Game Gear and Sega, and all the commercials are like Sega and Game Gear. So it was really smart for them to do. This is also the section where Nakayama calls Tom Nielsen and is like, why are you spending so much money? And it's a problem because they still have the problem with Walmart. Walmart hasn't budged, even though they have that store in Bentonville, Arkansas, and they have all those billboards. They still haven't gotten Walmart yet. But Tom Kalinske is like, just trust me. And Nakayama reluctantly lets him keep going, which is good because this is going to work out great. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Week 6 is called Altering the Beast. And I thought this was pretty cool because this is where we see them try to work with what they got. Because there are, at the time of, like, in this moment in 1991, 250,000 Genesis consoles with Altered Beast inside that are just sitting on store shelves.
Oh no, we gotta get rid of these if we're trying to sell the Sonic bundle.
Yeah, and Steve Race is trying to like work on other stuff, and he gets really frustrated because it's weird. Have you noticed like Steve Race is like extremely anti-Japan?
Yeah, and like some of the stuff he says in the book, which may or may not be verbatim, you know, nobody knows what people actually said 30 years ago, but he says some stuff that's like, I'm pretty sure that's racist, dude. You can't say that.
Yeah, and it's weird. So Tom Kalinske sees his frustration and pulls him off of the stuff of working with Sega of Japan to therefore work on what to do with these Altered Beast consoles. And they come up with this plan. And so I'm going to read the plan straight from the book because I don't see any other way of reading it. And it's also just a quote. So this is from the book on page 150. June 15th. Lower the price of Genesis and Altered Beast to $149.95. June 30th. Third party Graduate to Genesis promotion ends. July 1st. Begin promotion entitling customers to receive a free Sonic game by mail. So this is how they get around you just ordered a console with Altered Beast, but you didn't get Sonic, and Sonic's the hot thing now.
Mm-hmm.
Mid-July, begin shipping Genesis units with Sonic the Hedgehog to retailers. Mid-July to mid-August, ship remaining Genesis units plus Altered Beast to select retailers. And September 15th, exclusively sell Genesis plus Sonic the Hedgehog at $149.95. So, for the Altered Beast consoles that are on store shelves now, if you buy one, you get the Sonic coupon to get a free Sonic game. You can just send away
for it in the mail. That's a really good way to do that so that people who like buy it just before the switch over to Sonic don't feel like they got like ripped off. You know what I mean? Because like that can be really frustrating if you buy the thing and then they start giving away like the best game. Because like, let's be real, Sonic is a much better game than Altered Beast. So
you heard it here first, folks. Controversial opinion.
Hot take: Sonic's better than Altered Beast, but just giving it away to those folks that bought one within like kind of a certain time period of being like, okay, thank you for getting our Altered Beast Genesis off the shelf. Here's a free copy of Sonic. You get 2 games.
Yeah, and then what they did is they held the rest of because they had 100,000 on store shelves and 150,000 in the warehouse, and they held those consoles until the Sonic one came out, and then they put those ones out. They also, so that way they would just like, you have an option now. You can pick Sonic or you can pick Altered Beast, but no one gets upset. Because the big thing was making sure customers didn't get upset.
Yeah.
And giving them that FOMO feeling. Like,
yep.
I bought Altered Beast and now here's Sonic. I think there was also a thing in the book they talked about how they had a warehouse in the US too, where all these were stored. And they just straight up had employees open boxes, take out Altered Beast, put in Sonic, put it in a new box. Like, they just repacked them too.
Yeah, the ones that they could, they just repacked.
Yeah, I thought it was a great idea, though, and it shows that Sega really does care, because this is going to come back to bite Nintendo in a bit with, like, things of Nintendo not caring, you know? Think of the whole backwards compatibility talk we had last time about how the SNES was not backwards compatible, whereas the Sega Genesis was.
Yeah, and people got really mad about the SNES not being backward compatible like parents did. They were like, you're making all our old games non-playable, which is not true.
Yeah, I mean, you can still play them on the NES, and it was great.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I think we'll talk about it in a little bit as well, but like it is interesting that they sold the power-based converter that let you play Master System games on the Genesis. It was sold separately, and they didn't really sell that many of them. It wasn't really available in a whole lot of stores, and so they just didn't really sell very many of them. But the fact that it existed at all was like enough for parents to be like, okay, this is fine. But it turns out kids don't actually want that.
Yeah, kids don't want that.
Well, and the Master System was like, it was not the NES. You know, it didn't have the same like number of high quality titles, I think.
No, I don't even know if I've ever played a Master System.
I don't think I've ever played
I only played
either.
a Genesis, as a kid. So week 7's called Sonic Boom. And this is where we finally see Sonic start to release in late June and early July of 1991. They make a point in the book that I never really thought about. Release dates, like we have release dates now. Like this game's coming out on this date.
Yeah.
That wasn't really a thing in the 90s because you couldn't rely on shipping to be always on time.
Yeah.
Which I thought was pretty interesting.
And probably retailers just didn't care enough to agree to like a specific date to put it on there. Like video games just weren't big enough business. And also people didn't expect it either. Like I don't even think Sega would have asked for that. It's like one of those things like they didn't know they wanted it until they got it later, you know, I think. So, yeah. Yeah,
no, that whole like capitalism hype train of a release date is definitely a newer construct of
it's
society.
Just like, game's ready, we'll just start shipping them out, and then they'll just put it on the shelves when they get it, and like it just shows up when it shows up, and that's what players expected, that's what Sega expected, and that's what retailers did.
It gets to the store when it gets to the store. You'd have to go into the store and ask an employee, hey, when does the shipment of Sonic come in? And they would be like, probably between these 3 days. And you'd be like, okay, I'll come back.
Yeah, okay, I'll come back. Yeah, exactly.
The big part of this section, too, is that Sonic is booming now. He is becoming a thing. This little hedgehog is starting to make it in the U.S. You get Sonic fever going on at this point. And Kalinske really is trying to be like, no, Sega of Japan and Sega of America, we're all one company. But, you know, in the back of his mind, he can't help but hope that Sega of Japan feels a little stupid for not believing in him.
Yeah.
Because remember, they, like, screamed at him in that meeting when he pitched all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Week 8 is called The Happiest Place on Earth. And this is a little respite from the whole summer craziness. And Kalinske actually goes to Disneyland with his kids, and it's, like, during Sonic Mania. There's this nice story about Bruce Caspar and his daughter, Anik, who is sick and has pediatric AIDS. But did you, like, this is going to sound really messed up, but I didn't know how this fit in with everything else, unless we're just trying to see, like, this is what happened.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a side tangent that's like, oh, they met somebody that they used to, was it like a neighbor, or do we know Bruce Casper? I don't know, that name doesn't sound familiar.
They talked about it earlier, but he was a neighbor of theirs, and I think, it was just it was a very weird aside to break up the summer, and I think the whole point of it is, like, he did go on vacation, like, he did see his family and hang out with his family during this time, even though all this craziness went on, and he's kind of celebrating Sonic Fever, but it was a very strange break in the story.
Yeah, I gotta say the Sega portions of this game that this book that follow Tom Kalinske, like I think that's an interesting angle to take of like, well, let's sort of follow Tom Kalinske during all this time because he's making these moves. I like it for the Sega stuff. I don't care about his personal life really. So like when they talk about his like kids and his wife and like, oh, like, I don't know. It just doesn't, I don't care.
It's funny because you and I both talk about how we love the narrative aspect of the story, and then we're just taking a part of this guy's life that's in the narrative, and we're like, we could care less.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I'm here for stories about video games. I'm here for Kalinske's story as it helps tell the story of Sega versus Nintendo. I'm not here for Kalinske's story of his life. I don't care. I like
That's weird because I'm here to hear about Kalinsky riding Space Mountain. Is that not what we're here for?
Like I like Kalinsky as the person he is that does the Sega stuff. I don't, but honestly, I don't care about him. You know? Like,
yeah.
Sorry, Tom, if you're listening. Your story is interesting as a.
He is a character in this plot that we are enveloped in, but we don't need to know extra parts of his life. You know, I don't want to know what his favorite meal is.
I don't care.
Not a big deal to me. All right. So week 9 is called Humans Against Genesis, or HAG for short. And HAG was a commercial that Kalinsky hated. Even though he initially approved it, he just didn't see the point of it. The commercial was like a librarian being like, shh, about Sega, being mean. It was, it didn't really hit, you know, and I think everyone in the room saw that, but they were also really mad because they spent all this time on this thing. I feel like everyone's been in that position where someone asks you to do something and you spend all this time doing that thing and it's not what they had in mind.
Yeah, and they're like, I don't like this. And you're like, but I spent all this time doing the thing you told me to do and now it's not what you want?
Yeah, it's frustrating. So the whole team has to go back to the drawing board, and it's really him and Steve race. And then they also talk to Shinobu because they realize they need to fight dirty. And Shinobu Toyota needs to kind of be the go-between between Sega of Japan, because Sega of Japan does not want to fight negative. That is not a part of Japanese business culture. You just don't do that. And America's like, we got to do this. You know, we got to go on the attack. So this is the rumblings and the beginnings of like how they would go about doing this. Week 10 is called Attention Nintendo Console Owners. Shinobu Toyota decided to not tell Sega of Japan until it was too late to at least get 3 days of airtime before they pulled the ad. That was his strategy for this new negative commercial they're working on, is I'm going to play dumb, like I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's news to me.
It's the old ask for forgiveness, not permission thing. It's like, you gave us permission. You told us we could run ads, and if you don't like it, I guess we'll take it down. But it's already run for 3 days, so they got a lot of value out of it.
Yeah. It's important to note also that during this section of week 10 in 1991, Nintendo's going through some troubles. We have the lawsuit between Galoob and about Game Genie, and Nintendo loses that. They essentially the Game Genie can stay. Mike Tyson is convicted of rape, and he's like the hero of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, so that's a problem for Nintendo.
Yep.
There's a $5 coupon as punishment for their price-fixing lawsuit, but it wasn't really a punishment at all. Like, you've got a coupon for $5 when you spend $50 for Nintendo. It's like the punishment for Nintendo was to make a promotional deal. Yeah.
Okay.
It didn't hurt Nintendo in any way, shape, or form. It was just, and this was a lawsuit put forth by attorney generals of all 50 states about price fixing, things like that, which is stuff that Nintendo's been accused of since they were a trading card company. That's week 10. Week 11, Spy vs. Spy. Kalinsky is thinking of the commercial idea when Toyota comes in and tells him that Nintendo has confirmed they will sell the SNES for $199, just as the team at Sega of America expected. And Nilsson is happy, but he feels like he didn't really do this. Like, they guessed this, and he guessed correctly, but that's not something that he directly did to help, and he wants to feel like more helpful. So what he does is he goes to Richard Burns' office and has Richard Burns call the retailer that they know is way loyal to Nintendo and will essentially snitch on them and talk and like kind of perform that Sega is afraid that the SNES will release with a new Mario game. Because after all, that's what Sega wants. Sega wants Sonic versus Mario.
Yeah, they think they win this fight. In the Sonic versus Mario fight, they think they win that.
And SNES does come out with Super Mario World as the add-on. But did this really do that? Probably not.
They were probably planning on doing that to begin with, because they bundled Super Mario Brothers with the NES. I mean, probably more likely Sega bundling Sonic with the Genesis made it more likely that Nintendo bundled Super Mario World with the Super Nintendo. Like, that was probably what did it.
Yeah, that's what did it. But realistically, it's this is kind of what they want. You know, that's what they want. They want this fight. So Kalinsky thinks that while he was working at Mattel, this is kind of going back to the commercial idea, there was a competitor doll called Dawn, and Dawn was there to compete with Barbie. And once Dawn started to sell, Kalinsky made a promo where if you turn in your Dawn doll, you can get a Barbie for $2.
Ooh.
And Kalinsky starts having thoughts of wanting to do that with Nintendo. So
Turn
that's
in
what's
your
ruminating.
NES and get a Genesis.
Yeah, that's what's ruminating in his brain for like week 11. Week
I
12 is
think
called...
it was illegal by that point to do that.
Yeah, that's what we'll find out later.
Oh, okay.
It's very illegal and you cannot do that. So week 12 is called The Haves and Have-Nots. And Kalinsky tries to bring Steve Race on as a full-time employee. Because keep in mind, Steve Race was hired as a consultant. That's all he was. He did not want to be a full-time employee. He's a consultant at Sega. And Race doesn't want to become a full-time employee because he's tired of working with Sega of Japan. So they run by the idea of people turning in NESs for Genesis. That's what Kalinsky tells Race. Like, this is what I'm thinking. And then Race goes, we can't. That's very illegal. We can't do that.
I wonder if it was made illegal because of the Dawn thing, because that worked for them, right? Like, Dawn basically disappeared.
Yeah, I think so. But Nilsson, so they decide this is not going to work. We got to go back to the drawing board again for this commercial. We can't do that. Nilsson's idea, though, is to do a Sega World Tour in malls across the country, which is funny because it's called World Tour. That's what they call it, but it's just in malls in the United States.
It's only in the US.
So it's
all right.
It's very US thought process there.
Yeah, that's the whole world, from Washington to Florida, from New York to California, all over the world.
Exactly. Race thinks that's a disaster in execution because he's like that. Just organizing a mall tour like that is so incredibly crazy to do from a budget standpoint and also just a manpower standpoint. So he decides to bring in someone who he thinks would be able to handle this, and they say EBVB. We got to bring in EBVB. And EBVB in week 13 it's called EBVB, stands for Ellen
EBVB.
Beth Van Buskirk. And she was a marketing director at a ski resort at the time Steve Race contacted her. But she's a very meticulous and talented person, and she loves a challenge. And she you get the impression that she's working at the ski resort, but she's kind of just not super into it. Mm-hmm. And so she agrees to go to lunch with Al Nilsson to talk about this mall tour. And I wrote down, he approves because of duck sauce, because they have this conversation, which I think kind of shows how her brain works, which is really cool, where she's really into the details. And so she talks about duck sauce, and then she looks up what duck sauce is, and she has this long conversation with Al Nilsson about duck sauce and how duck sauce is not really made of duck. It's just a sauce that goes with duck.
It's used when you eat duck.
Yeah, and it was this whole thing, but I like it because it shows like how she's very meticulous and detailed, and she cares about that, which is something you need to run a tour, be a tour manager, essentially. And Nilsson's impressed, and she's on board. She's on board with the small tour, even though she is extremely overqualified. Like, this is way below her pay grade, is how you could describe it. And her answer on where to start the mall tour is Bellevue, Washington, which is 5 miles from Nintendo headquarters.
Ooh, boy.
And the other aspect of the mall tour that she adds on is the mall tour should have a voting system where people can vote for who is better, Sonic or Mario. Like, we will be collecting numbers.
Wow.
On this mall tour.
Risky, but they really were pretty confident in Sonic.
Yeah, they were they did those focus groups before with Sonic versus Mario, and they saw that Sonic got high numbers. So they were very confident in how this would work. So week 14 is called Rolling Thunder. And Sega's commercial idea is called The Salesman, where a salesman tries to sell the consumer in the first-person perspective. The consumer is the first person because that way they're representing everyone.
Yeah, anybody can see themselves if they're looking through the eyes of the consumer.
And the salesman is trying to sell them a Nintendo or an SNES, but they see all the positives of the Genesis instead, is what happens. That's the commercial, the basics of the commercial. And Rolling Thunder is what the week is called because the ad is going to be bombarded at first on television and then slowed down. They did this for budgetary reasons and also Shinobu Toyota's idea about SOJ getting upset. So that way, if Sega of Japan gets upset, they at least get 3 days of solid advertising and then they pull the ad.
That's the way to do it.
It's the way to go. Ask for forgiveness, not for permission. That's how they're doing it. Week 15, Coke versus Pepsi. The dreaded phone call happens, where Shinobu Toyota comes clean to Nakayama about everything. The commercial, the mall tour, all of the aggressive stuff towards Nintendo in general, what they've been doing marketing-wise. And Nakayama is into it. He's not mad at all, because he just read a book about John Scully, who used the same tactic to go after Coca-Cola when he worked at PepsiCo, and he's like, this is great. You guys are doing the perfect thing. Like, he's embracing the Western philosophy of business here, which is go on the attack.
Yeah. John Scully would later on go to replace Steve Jobs as CEO of Apple. And start the long descent of Apple in the 90s. Late in the
so
mid-80s.
So he did a great job
90s.
with Pepsi, not so great with computers.
Yeah.
No, poor John Scully. I bet you he's fine, though. He's probably a millionaire.
I think he's doing okay, yeah. He's certainly a billionaire.
Yeah. Is he a billionaire? Really?
I'm sure he is.
You should Google it. I'm curious if this person's a billionaire. Let's get to the final week, though. Week 16 is called After the Summer Comes the Fall. And there's some big things that happen. The section opens up with Kalinske getting a call from the Walmart guy, the electronics division lead at Walmart, and they will carry the Sega. It worked. He wore the guy down. His bosses were constantly talking about how come we don't sell Genesis? How come we don't sell Genesis? How come we don't sell Genesis? The store in Bentonville worked. The billboards worked. The phone calls. Kalinske was mailing clips, newspaper clippings of how well Sega was doing all summer to Walmart and letting them know and calling them like every day. It works. Walmart will now cover Sega products, not everywhere, but in certain like test regions at first. But now that they have Walmart on board, other retailers will fall into line when they see Walmart.
Yep, that'll do it.
Also, the tour was happening. The Sega World Tour. It started at the Alderwood Mall in Bellevue, Washington, which is about 30 minutes from me. And
you can go visit the site where it all started. John Scully, not a billionaire. Estimates, which are not really accurate usually, but the estimates say only 20 to 25 million, which seems pretty low for a person who is CEO of Apple. But I guess it was CEO of Apple in the 80s and 90s, which is not...
That's true.
That's the worst time to be CEO of Apple.
Yeah. The tour also picked up so much steam that they partnered with Nickelodeon to have a spotlight on the tour. So now we have Nickelodeon doing spots on TV about the Sega World Tour. Fun last little anecdote. Peter Main shows up in the audience of the first day of the Sega Tour, and he is not happy.
Yeah, he's a Nintendo guy.
Definitely, yep. Is he the CEO of Nintendo at this point?
Something like that. He's a big wig at Nintendo.
Yeah, Arakawa is the CEO, but Peter Main is like the public face of Nintendo. Yeah. So, and he is not a happy camper at what's going on with the Sega Tour. So that's chapter 18. I think this chapter is really cool how they lay it all out. And they show you like a step-by-step plan of like, this is the real rise of Sega, the beginning of the rise of Sega and what they did. This is
it happening. That summer is where they laid that groundwork for them to eventually beat Nintendo. Spoilers, but they beat Nintendo in the console wars of the 16-bit generation.
Yeah.
And then lose in spectacular fashion very shortly after. It's kind of great.
It is great. That's why this story is so exciting. But Chapter 19 is called The Enemy of My Enemy, and we start with a lawsuit between Nintendo and Tengen. Is it Tengen or Tengen? I always forget that.
I think it's Tengen.
Tengen, yeah, okay. Minoru Arakawa was asked in court, quote, if he considered the inventor of Sonic to be a genius on par with the likes of Shigeru Miyamoto, who had created Mario, Zelda, and other classic games for Nintendo, end quote.
Wow. Are you talking about Yuji Naka, the guy who made the game, or...
I think so. Yeah.
He's getting into some Twitter trouble in recent days.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's kind of arrogant and hasn't really done anything in a while. And people are like, okay.
Like, okay, weirdo. Well, the funny thing about this is Arakawa has to admit in court that yes, Sonic is genius.
Love it.
Nintendo sold 500,000 SNESs at launch, which is really good. That's their whole stock. But it still fell slightly below the initial forecast. And Yamauchi is not happy with Arakawa. So Nintendo of Japan is not happy with Nintendo of America at this point. There's also the no backwards compatibility thing that we talked about earlier. That is really backfiring for them on Nintendo. And parents are upset, kids are upset, because Sega has this power base converter. And they talk in the book about how it did not sell well. It is not it's like their least selling item, but just the fact that they have the power base converter means a lot because Sega can always point to that, be like, no, see, we care about backwards compatibility. We got that.
That seems to be a recurring thing, and we probably talked about this when we talked about backward compatibility a few episodes ago, but that seems to be a recurring thing where like gamers and people talk about how much they love backward compatibility and how they want it and every console should have it. But the numbers always show people don't use it. Like the number of people that play PS2 games on their PS3 is like so small. And the number of people who played Master System games on their Genesis, vanishingly small. Like, I wonder what the numbers are for the Xbox One and like Xbox 360 and original Xbox games. I bet they are super, super small. But it's always such a big win in terms of PR or perception of the brand that they let you do, like play older games on the newer systems, that it's always like, it's like no one actually uses this, but they all want it and they love it when you give it to them. So you got to do it, you know?
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because Xbox, if I recall, they just announced that they're not doing any more Xbox 360 games on Games with Gold. That was new this week.
Yeah.
But previously, they stopped doing Xbox and Xbox 360 electronic backwards compatibility games. Like, they've released all the games they're going to make backwards compatible, but they said it was for technological reasons. Like, this is why we're doing it. And just the fact that they had some out there really saved their bacon. I think they're looking good right now, Xbox is, as far as backwards compatibility. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I want to know how many people are actually going back and playing the old Ninja Gaiden on their Xbox One or Xbox Series X.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't doubt there are, but I don't think it's like the crazy numbers that would suggest this, you know?
It's not so many that they're selling consoles because of it, right? The kind of people that want to play Ninja Gaiden on their Xbox One probably have an original Xbox they can just play it on, you know?
Yeah, totally. And this is a very interesting part of this whole backwards compatibility deal, because it's very,
people love it, people want it. It makes you upset when you don't have it, but then when you have it, you don't use it.
That's right. So during this lawsuit, Nielsen, Kalinsky, Toyota, and Burns are all packing into a car in New York to go meet with Tengen CEO Danvell Eldarin, and Sega is partnering with Tengen. Now, here's where the drama comes in, because behind the scenes, it turns out this whole time, Nakayama and Sega has been helping Tengen financially with their legal fees against Nintendo. Ooh. There's even rumors that Sega helped Tengen reverse engineer the NES, which is pretty juicy. It's a pretty juicy rumor.
Yeah.
Cannot be confirmed, but they talk about it in the book being like, there's a good chance this happened, but there's no way to prove it.
Yeah, that's funny. It wouldn't surprise me, but I also seems a little far-fetched. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like some real corporate espionage, secrecy stuff going on, but I wouldn't, it wouldn't surprise me, but we'll just leave it as a rumor. It's just a juicy rumor. Mm-hmm. So the other big news in this chapter is that EBVB is staying to run communications at Sega after the mall tour because she's just so good. She's so good. Mm-hmm. That's what we get through this book. She's just the best. 88% of people on that mall tour, by the way, chose Sonic the Hedgehog over Nintendo.
Wow, that's huge.
It was a win. It was a huge win. Quick tangent, by the way, because I was curious. I was like, I wonder where these people are now. Like Ellen, Beth Van Buskirk, and like Tom Kalinsky and Al Nielsen. And Shinobu Toyota. I tried to look up Steve Race, but I couldn't find his profile. I'm sure it's on there. There's just a lot of people named Steve Race. But you can find them on LinkedIn. And I was looking it up. And so Ellen Beth Van Buskirk actually worked at IBM and also L'Oreal and is now running a new brand, which is a big company. You know, like I think it's a marketing company. And also Al Nielsen has his own marketing company. Tom Kalinsky is just a rich guy, it looks like. It says CEO, venture capital mentor. I'm like, this guy's just loaded. You know, I'm curious how expensive he is. Expensive? That's not the right term, but it's fine. Shinobu Toyota, though, I looked up, he worked in games still. He worked for Unity up until December 2021.
Oh, wow. That's pretty...
Yeah, chairman of the board,
cool.
Unity Technologies, Japan. And he also worked at Crytek. So it's kind of cool to see, like, if you're curious where these people are now, I just say jump on LinkedIn because you can see where they worked and, like, if they stayed in games or not. And a lot of them didn't, but I think Shinobu Toyota is the one that stayed in games the longest. up until as recent as December of last year. But I just think it's a cool little thing you can do.
Yeah, I did find Stephen Race, who is this person that ran the PlayStation Group, and he worked at Reebok. Sega is not on his
Interesting.
thing.
Well, he was a consultant, so I wonder if he doesn't put it on there intentionally.
Maybe. Yeah, that's actually a good point. Maybe that's why.
I didn't try Stephen Race. That was my flaw.
Yeah, I just searched for Steve Race, Sony, and it came up as Stephen Race with a PH. So.
Oh, well, that would be an issue. That was my spelling error. That's cool, though. I'm glad. Yeah, so it's interesting to see.
He's an investor now.
Yeah, a lot of these people, I'm sure, are much
Tom
older and very
Kalinske
rich
too,
and
yeah.
just investing.
Yep.
Also, Tom Kalinske says mentor. Do you think he'd be a mentor of our podcast?
Yeah. He's like, no, absolutely not. You guys said you don't care about me. Mike cares about you, Tom. I don't.
Boom, roasted. All right. So, Van Buskirk, by the way, she did a great job on this tour, so much so that she caught the attention of Sega of Japan, and they pulled her in for Sega to sponsor the first ever Sega Women's Championship in the LPGA. So this started on April 19th, 1992. And so Van Buskirk is getting pulled away from the team right now because Sega of Japan is actually working with her and wants to work with her. Which kind of like, they're having this conversation in the car as they're driving to Tengen and they're meeting. It's a press conference, actually. He's driving to this press conference with Tengen, and you can see some like weirdness, like weird office guy, 80s office guy vibes with like LPGA and stuff. So it kind of shows the times in this area too, but it also shows they have so much respect for Ellen Beth Van Buskirk. They're kind of mad that she got taken away.
Yeah.
You know? It's almost like they're jealous in a way that she's working with the Sega of Japan. So Sega of America and Tengen have their press conference, and it goes super well. They get drinks afterward. Val Eldarin shares that that Arakawa had to say Sonic was genius under oath. He told that to Tom Kalinske, and because Tom Kalinski's like, "How's the lawsuit going?" He's like, "I can't talk about it, but I can tell you this part." Kalinske actually leaves the meeting to go talk with Olaf Olafsson and Mickey Schulhoff of Sony. And this is a really cool moment. You have two companies here. They're Japanese companies, and these are like kind of the leaders of their American counterparts. And they're planning the future for a relationship with each other between the two companies, but they're kind of doing it behind the back of their big bosses. Mm-hmm. And they both agree that Sony can help with software, since Kalinske confirms the assumptions that Sony had that Sega is working on CD technology for the Genesis. And then we have Olafsson and Schulhoff fully open about one day going into the console business potentially, and if that would bother Tom Kalinske, and he's fine with it. So this just feels like a secret meeting, you know, like a secret meeting. It's like the Illuminati of consoles makers, you know? And I just kind of love it because they all go, well, we got to check with our bosses. And he's like, we got to check with our bosses. But it's just kind of a nice dinner meeting where they all talk about how the deal is Sony's going to make software for Sega because with this CD drive, they need to do that. That was the talk. But just the planning of the future and how far ahead they're going with this. We all know that this is the early PlayStation.
You got to plan the future.
That's right. So that's chapter 19.
Yeah. Chapter 20 is a quick one. It's called Worth Waiting For, and this chapter is kind of all about how the Genesis is just selling like hotcakes and gangbusters. By Christmas of 1991, they actually had 25% of the market, which is pretty huge. I think that must include the NES, or maybe they were selling, I don't know what 25% of the market means, if that means during that time period they sold 25% of things. But anyway, the Genesis is doing extremely well. Sonic had come out. He was doing really well. And they had hardware shortages. Like this was a time where people, you couldn't just walk into a store and buy a Genesis. And the Genesis had been out for 2 years already by this point. So the fact that Sega had done such a good job and that Sonic was so good that it actually caused a hardware shortage later on in the console's lifespan, I think that's impressive.
Yeah, that says a lot.
What they thought about doing like a pre-order system around Christmas where you could like put your money down for a Sega and then basically be in line to get one when it comes out, and you get a cool t-shirt showing that you'd waited for the Genesis. They didn't do that, but the author of this book sort of foreshadows that this is a tactic they would use later. This would be like an important thing that they do. But Sega knew it was like hard to get a Genesis at this point, so they started airing ads, like these ads that are going after Nintendo and saying, hey, don't buy an NES, don't buy a Super Nintendo, wait for the Genesis. It's going to be worth it. We promise. Just wait and, keep checking your store, call them up, ask them when it's going to be in store, and you just get your Genesis. Don't settle. That's kind of like what the ad was, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I like that. Again, we have this whole, they're playing, we don't see Nintendo strike back, do we?
No, not really. Nintendo keeps that like very Japanese way of business of like, we don't talk about our competitors. We just let our stuff speak for itself. And Genesis,
they really turn the other cheek doing this.
Yeah. And they would sort of be punching down, I guess. I mean, in business, maybe it doesn't matter, but Nintendo is definitely like the big dog here. And so for them to go after Sega might be perceived weirdly, whereas Sega punching up to Nintendo, totally fine. No one cares. I love it.
No one's mad at it. If anything, like some fans probably just love it.
Yeah. And so they like at this point they sort of assume they're just decimating Nintendo. Technically the Genesis was outselling the Super Nintendo at this point. The Super Nintendo had sold like 1.4 million and the Genesis sold 1.6. So the Genesis was outselling, but the Super Nintendo was on shelves and it had just come out. Whereas the Genesis had been out for 2 years already. So the Super Nintendo is like kind of off to a larger beginning than the Genesis. So I don't think it was as good as maybe they thought it was. We get the bit here that Kalinski's wife is pregnant at this time. So that's nice for him, but I don't care.
I love this trend.
This is the bit now, is that I don't care about Tom Kalinski's personal life. Steve Race was playing a lot of handhelds at this time. He hired a new head of marketing for the Game Gear. So the goal here was for Sega to make Nintendo like fight a war in two areas, on two fronts, I guess. So like you got to fight Sega in the console business for the home, and you've also got to fight Sega on the handheld list. The Game Gear, though, really wasn't doing that well. It was technologically superior to the Game Boy, but it was more expensive. It took a ton of batteries. It had no battery life. They released like an accessory that sort of gave it a little bit more battery life. And they released a TV tuner for it, which was cool. Like that was something you wouldn't have been able to do on the Game Boy because the Game Boy didn't have a color screen, but the Game Gear you could watch TV on if you bought the TV tuner thing. So
that is cool.
Yeah, that's kind of neat, but overall it just wasn't doing it. You know why? It's because Game Gear didn't have games. That's what I think.
Didn't have games, and you could watch 30 minutes of TV and the battery would die.
Yeah, exactly. Like what Game Boy had Tetris. Game Gear had what, Columns? That was just a Tetris ripoff. You could just go get a Game Boy for half the price with Game Gear and play Tetris that way. Play real Tetris.
Yeah, that's something like if they made it. I wonder what would have happened if they'd have made a product that was not a color screen, but just like almost just like a Game Boy.
Yeah, well then it would have just been games versus
and
games.
Cheaper. Yeah, and they could have done like Sonic. Yeah,
because like the Game Gear did have Sonic on it. It was
cool.
And it was cool. And it was basically the Master System version of the game because Game Gear is just a portable Master System. It just didn't have games. And if they released a cheaper product that didn't have color, they would still not have had games. And then it would have just been an even easier choice to buy the Game Boy because if you're just comparing them, not even on their technological merits, if they had the same technology in them, then it's just, well, which one's got the better games? Game Boy far and away had better games, and it still won because of that anyway. But
gosh, Super Mario Land crushes it.
Yep, super good. But Steve Race, he's mad and concerned about Sega of Japan because he's still having troubles between them. Sega of America, Sega in Japan, still not quite getting along. And at this point, once again, Kalinske offers Steve Race a job because he's still a consultant. And he's like, you can have this job leading marketing. And he's like, I don't know. I don't really want to keep working with Sega of Japan. So Kalinsky's like, well, this job's yours. We need someone here because they were getting a new ad agency at the time. We need somebody to help us through this transition with a new ad agency. And he's like, you know what? I'm out. Peace. I'm a head out. So he decided to leave. This is when Steve Race is just like, okay, we're done here. I'll show the new guy, whoever you hire to do this job. I'll show him what's up. We'll go to CES because the E3 didn't exist yet. We'll go to CES. We'll do that. But that's it. And then Race later would go on to Sony, but we'll get to that later on. That's kind of where the chapter ends here is now Steve Race is gone from Sega after doing tons of good work as a consultant, but never as an actual employee.
Yeah, I think because I remember one of the big gripes that he had was the time difference.
Yeah.
And he talked about how he would do all this work and then go to bed. And that's when people in Japan are like waking up and undo all the work he did.
Yeah. So
or
then he
change
shows
their
up the next
mind.
day and he's like, oh, this is terrible.
Which has got to be frustrating. But yeah, I think that was just, he just didn't like it. Because he also probably didn't feel like he was in control. And I feel like the personality we're shown, I mean, granted, we're just going off of what's in the book. Steve Race very much seems like the kind of guy who wants to be in full control of the marketing of something. So he knows what's going on, which makes sense if you're doing the marketing.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't like feeling like he's not trusted, too.
Yeah, that's true, too. So, you know, he was there, he left, he helped, he introduced them to, you know, wonderful, wonderful EVBV. Did I say it right that time?
EBVB.
EBVB. I reversed it. But yeah, it's good run, Steve Race. We'll see you later in this book. Goodbye for now. All right.
That's all we got for today on
Yeah.
on at least on Console Wars. We have one more chapter in what is called Part 2, Sonic versus Mario. We didn't want to do that one today because we're getting a little long already.
I mean, it's almost an hour. This is nuts. We've been really getting into it today, which is good.
Yeah.
You know, I'm excited about it. But Tyler, what you been playing?
Persona 5 Strikers. I'm back into it. I finished another dungeon. I think I'm on the final dungeon of the game. And I think later on today I'm going to try to finish that game so that I will be ready when Persona 5 Royal comes out. I will be playing through that one again. I want to play Persona 4 as well. And I want to play the fighting games of Persona 4 Arena and Persona 4 Arena Ultimax because they sort of push forward the story of Persona 4. So I gotta get those.
You're getting fully personified.
Yeah, I'm getting fully personified. That's kind of it. I mean, I'm playing Destiny a little bit too. But yeah, basically,
Nice.
I've been traveling a lot, so I haven't had a lot of time to play games. But I did bring my handheld PC with me, and so I played some Persona 5 Strikers while I was traveling, and I beat a boss. It was really hard. So,
Well, I was playing Super Mario 3D Land.
that's a great game.
Or 3D World, excuse me. And I beat it. I beat the game. But I didn't beat it on my trip. I beat it at home because tragedy struck on my flight back. The AC adapters in the seats didn't work.
Oh no!
So my Switch died an hour into the 10.5-hour flight.
Ugh.
And I just assumed that I'd have an AC adapter and I'd be able to charge it. But no, Lufthansa's like, absolutely not. They will not give you power. Yeah, it hurts so bad. And I didn't have, they had a USB port, but I just had the AC adapter, you know, because also charging on a USB port for like USB-C for the Switch would take forever.
Yeah, and you don't really know how much power those airline things are putting out. Like sometimes I think they just put out enough power so that your phone doesn't lose battery. And if you're trying to charge a Switch that uses more energy than a phone, like you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah. Yeah, so I didn't really get to play as many games as I'd like because I didn't play games while I was on my trip. It was like a European tour thing. We were go. So I only really played on the plane. But I did beat Super Mario 3D World, which I'm finally happy about that I beat that.
Nice.
And that
Great
game's super fun. And now I'm just kind of, I played Fall Guys.
Oh yeah, that's
that
free
showed
now.
up on Xbox. It's free. Yeah. And I played that. That's pretty fun. I get the appeal. I think that'd be a fun game to play with the Codex crew if people wanted to play that together sometime. And, yeah, now I'm just playing Destiny, but I'm trying to decide what to jump into next year. I have a lot of irons in the fire of what I could play, and I just need to make a decision and just play one. So that's what this week is. But we got a couple emails to read. Do we want to read some emails?
Yeah, I'll read this one from Mackenzie. Mackenzie says, "Hello again, Mackenzie here. I finally figured out how to get around the big stupid mountain on Pokemon Legends Arceus on the way to Brava Arena. I gave in and looked up a tutorial, and it turns out you're supposed to climb the mountain, not go around it like I had been trying to do for hours. But it got me thinking about video game walkthroughs. I'm not a hardcore gamer, so I don't really have anything against looking up answers when I need help, even if I don't have to figure out a solution for myself. How do you feel about using tutorials or wikis when you're stuck? Loved the last episode. Hearts, Spider Tushies, Mackenzie." Thanks, Mackenzie. Walkthroughs.
Oh, I'll use them even if I'm not stuck.
Yeah.
I'll use them if I feel like it. I have no shame about using a walkthrough or a tutorial. I know the big thing with both of us, though, Tyler. We want that text. We don't want videos.
Oh, yeah. No way. I want text walkthroughs. I generally, I will I'll play a game without a walkthrough for as long as I can. When I get a little stuck, if I feel like I'm not making progress and I could just look up the answer to something, I'll do it. But I usually want to try it a few times before I give in and look up a walkthrough. But it depends. For some things where it's like, oh, this is actually not going to be a fun thing to figure out. It's just going to be like a brute force thing where I have to like just try everything and then figure out the thing that works. Lots of times I'll just look it up, but if the fun of the game is figuring out, the attack patterns, like I assume people have fun when they play Dark Souls, like looking up or figuring out the attack patterns of the enemies. If that's the fun part of the game, then looking up a walkthrough kind of takes away the fun part. But if that's not the fun part for you, if the fun part is just executing and already knowing the things, then look up a walkthrough and figure out what the attack patterns are, that kind of stuff. I don't have a problem with it. I mean, it's all just for fun, right? It's whatever's most fun for you. So I don't have a problem.
Yeah, if you enjoy the challenge of going in blind, like, because Tyler, we talked about doing like Destiny raids blind, because that's for us the thing that we want to do. We don't look up tutorials in that. We all agree on that. We go in blind. But for a game like Dark Souls, I had a YouTube video I was like following along with, and it felt like I was playing the game with someone else, and it was kind of nice.
Oh,
I had
that's
a fun
fun.
time with it.
Nice.
Which is funny because I had multiple friends be like, why didn't you just do it with me? I'm a real person and not on a video. And I'm like, well, it was 1 a.m, so I didn't want to call you. But yeah, I think tutorials, whatever, totally fine. Totally valid. I remember as a kid, I called one of those helplines one time for Tomb Raider 3.
Oh man, was that like $800 a minute?
Yeah, it was expensive. My mom is a saint. I'm sorry, Jackie, for that. But all I learned was that my game had a bug in it. And I couldn't progress forward. Yeah, it really hurt. Okay. Next email is called Desert Island. This is from Will from Texas. And it says, "Good morning, Mike and Tyler. Really enjoyed the console tiers episode. I'd personally rather be stuck on a desert island." Me too. But I liked the gun to my head style question that you used to determine where a console stood on the tier list. However, I don't believe you guys ever answered the question yourselves. If you were stuck on a desert island and magically had a working console with electricity and a TV, what would it be for you guys? I'd say the parameters include just that console's library, no backwards compatibility, or Game Pass type shenanigans. Let's answer this first, Tyler.
Desert Island, to just make a call, because it's so hard to actually make a call. I think I got to go with PS2. I think just the library is so big and there's so many good like RPGs and just the types of games that I love. And it got all of the multi-platform games of that era. They weren't always the best on the PS2, but it got all of them pretty much. So that's probably the one I'd take. I'd be sad about missing out on all the other great games on other platforms, but I think that's what you got to go with. That's my take.
Good. That's a good take. I think, I'm gonna be boring and I'm gonna agree with you. I think I'm gonna go with PS2 also, because the library is just so huge. If there's no backwards compatibility or Game Pass type shenanigans, which we've agreed on here, mm-hmm. I think the PS2 is the safest bet.
Yeah, like N64, the library is so small. GameCube, small library. Xbox, small library. And I mean, library size isn't the be all end all, but the fact that the Xbox, more or less, its library is a subset of the PS2's library outside of exclusives, which the Xbox had a few good exclusives. GameCube had a lot of great exclusives, just because it's a Nintendo console. But like I wouldn't pick the Wii, which may have more titles than the PS2, because most of those titles are shovelware. The original PlayStation has a lot of titles too, but they're kind of old, and I think if you don't have nostalgia for a PlayStation game, they're not going to hold up very well.
I was trying to think about like Xbox 360 or something, because they had some games I really could like play forever, like Oblivion or Fallout 3. But I think, like you said, there's just so many fun like RPGs and things on PlayStation 2. And SNES and NES are great, but I'm worried that I'm remembering 3 or 4 games that I really loved that don't have a really high replayability value.
I might take the Xbox 360. I know we put it as B tier in our tier list, but the Xbox 360 has a good and varied library. Like you said,
it also has Halo 3.
Yeah. It's got those open world RPGs too. The Fallouts and the Oblivions and Skyrims.
Yeah.
So I don't know
what? To be different, I'm gonna pick 360, because that is the game console I had.
So you would take on a deserted island, you would take a B tier console. What was our criteria even? Like, I feel like if it's even in the contention for being a desert island thing, we should have made it S tier. But yeah, well, can't go back. It's just how we were feeling on that day, I guess.
We made a choice. We stuck to our choice.
Yep.
All right. This continuation in this email from Will here. It says, P.S. Mike, tell the Codex faithful about your trip to Europe, a.k.a. the real reason I sent this email. Will from Texas. It's people care. I guess I'll do a quick 2-minute summary. All right. You ready, Tyler?
Yep, I'm ready.
Don't time me. Okay. I was on a trip. It was to Europe. It was for high school students. It was an EF tour. And I went to Germany, Austria, Italy, and then back to Switzerland, and then back to Germany again. We did like a circle. We started at Frankfurt. We went to Rothenburg. I can never say it right. It's like this old medieval village, like from the 10th century or 11th century. It's very old, very cool. Then we went to Munich for 2 days. We went to a palace, like Linderhof Palace, which is like this palace in the middle of nowhere. It's like in the woods, secluded from a crazy king, King Ludwig, which made me think of Super Mario. And then we went to Venice, which was really cool and also really interesting because I was like, this is really crowded. And then our tour guide was like, this is 30% capacity. And that was mind blowing to me. Venice is apparently usually so crowded that you cannot see the tiles you're walking on.
Wow.
There are people, just wall-to-wall people. So we got kind of lucky. And then we went from there. Oh, on the way from Munich to Venice, we stopped in Innsbruck, Austria, which was really good. I was like all about trying to eat as much street food as I possibly could. Mm-hmm. And I had a hot dog that had grilled onions in it, which is not crazy. But then like mustard and like a curry powder on top. It was like called a bonza. It was so good. It slapped. 24/7. Big fan. And then from Venice, we went to Verona on a stop on the bus. So I got to see Verona, which was very cool. I had gelato. Also in Venice, I had gelato 3 times in one day because it was like 90 degrees. So that's important to note. And then stopped in Lucerne, Switzerland, which might be one of my favorite cities ever. Lucerne, Switzerland. Very nice city. Very like pristine lake, mountain town. Really cool. Really a big fan. I went swimming in the lake and then walked across the oldest wooden bridge in Europe.
Wow.
Which was pretty neat. And then from there, we went to Heidelberg, Germany, saw Heidelberg Castle, and then we went back to Frankfurt to fly out back home. So there was a lot that happened. That was a Cliff Notes version of it, but it was a really fun trip. And those tours are fun because they're like go, 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 go. So it was just kind of a nice decompress where I just turned off. I didn't have a phone plan. I turned off my phone and I just kind of went.
Nice.
Which was really, really fun. So yeah, it was good. Thank you for asking, Will. I hope people cared.
I cared, Mike. You know what? It's your podcast. You can say whatever you want.
That's great.
Full refund. If you didn't like Mike's talk of Germany, you can have a full refund.
Full refund. There it is. So with that, though, things you could do to help support us. You could rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can tell your friends about us. That really helps out a lot. You can also send us an email, codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. And you can also finally join our Discord if you'd like. Our Discord, I can either email you a link or you can go to my Twitter page @Mecoletta, MECOLETTA. Click on the pinned tweet at the top of my profile. That is an invite that never expires. Tyler is on Twitter too @SneakerElf with ELPH. And that's it. I think we did it. A longer episode today, but it was fun.
Just a little bit longer.
It was a fun one. So, you want to say bye to everybody?
Sure. Goodbye, everybody.